I'm Beth Schaefer. I am your host today. I am the director of the Institute for Professional Development at Metropolitan State University. IPD is the non-credit professional development arm of the college, so we extend the university's education mission by providing additional professional development to people as they move through their careers or with their employers. And today, our expert, excuse me, coming off a cold, our expert and facilitator is Mandy Spees. Mandy, I was lucky enough to inherit Mandy when I took over the department a little over 10 years ago. So Mandy's been around longer than I've been around. And she is a regular instructor for IPD. She brings not only her veteran helicopter pilot experience, but she brings lots of experience from Fortune 500, 100 companies with her knowledge and skills in change management, project management, process, and business architecture. So we're really pleased to have Mandy with us today. Okay, let me see if I can, there we go. Change slide. Okay.
Yes, we're good.
All right, thank you, Mandy. While we specialize in leadership skills that layer on top of degrees such as supervision, management, change leadership, one of those skills is business architecture. And I belong to the MinGov Business Architecture Community of Practice. And you can join this group for free. If you are an employee in Minnesota, public sector employee in a city, county, or state agency, we meet every other month to talk about how we're applying business architecture skills and transformation leadership to public sector entities. If you're interested in joining the group, you can email me, and my email's on the bottom of the slide. Email me your name, role, and organization you work for, and I will pass it along to the leader of the group. And then you'll just receive calendar appointments from teams from that person to join the group. So if that's something you're interested in, you can take that action. We are going to be launching in just a couple short weeks now our business architecture certificate training. We are offering it online or virtual. It's a synchronous course, so you meet as a cohort. And Mandy is one of the instructors in that course, along with Baudu and Dean Heltemez. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to pause because I see Shelly's question. Shelly, I would think so. I'd say send me your information and we'll see what we can do. But if this class will be starting, registration closes a week from today, and the class will be starting in a couple weeks. It is a fabulous course, and it creates a great cohort atmosphere for people. And I feel like there we go. Oh, is that the only little flag I had? Thought I had another one. Oh, there we go. Next page. Okay. The course runs 15 nights, 6 to 9 p.m. Central Time. And it's two parts. First part are tools to understand your customers and your clients using modern day trendy and currently new practices and design thinking. And then part two is about using that information to develop a strategy to get to align your transformation and your transformation tools to your current business strategies, strategic initiatives, etc. If you send 3 or more people, you can get a corporate discount. Now it says corporate, but we count it for nonprofit and state agencies, government agencies, but that's just the title of it. So if you have 3 or more people that you'd like to send me an email and I'll hook you up with Catherine, our operations lead. She's got the discount code and she'll send it out and get you all set up. With that, thank you for joining us today. Some of you are joining us from other parts of the country. We're here in Minnesota, where we had a record low temperature this morning. In 4 years, it hasn't been this cold, -20 at my house without wind chill. So we were wondering if we were going to have a lot of people join us today, or if a bunch of people were like, man, I got kids at home because they didn't go to school, or my internet's not working because it's too cold outside. You never know. So we're happy to have you, and I see some familiar names from our courses in the past. Mandy's probably, I don't know if you're scrolling through the list, Mandy, taking a look at folks that you know. I am going to stop sharing so Mandy can start sharing. And while Mandy gets set up, I will let you know that I will drop into the chat the link to the business architecture course, so that as you listen to Mandy today and you say, I think I might want to go to a course that Mandy teaches, you will have the direct link to the website to take a look at more information on that. And Mandy's going to let you know how to, we are being recorded. So know that if you speak, you will be part of the recording today. You can send questions. Well, Mandy's going to tell you how to be involved, but if you don't want to be, if you want to ask a question and not have your name known, just let Mandy know that. She won't say it out loud in the recording. So, all right, Mandy, to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Beth, and welcome everybody. Happy to be here and talk a bit about transformation leadership. So a lot of what you're going to hear today is, if you have any experience in the business architecture certificate program, you're going to see a lot of overlaps, but this is really broader than kind of business architecture exclusively. So we're going to talk about really business architecture is one of the many tools, and really business architecture has many tools in and of itself that can be used from a transformation perspective. And so, but one of the things that I've definitely noticed over the last couple of years is essentially kind of bringing it to life in a real world. So, and this typically is in the form of business transformations that occur. And so, as we go through today, if you have any questions, and I'll try to keep an eye on, kind of watching for hands that go up. But if you have questions and I'm missing something, please just give me a holler, or go ahead and just unmute and chime in, and then we'll go from there. So first of all, I figured it's really important, first of all, to start by, what do we mean by business transformations? And the whole concept of this is that organizations in general recognize that if they want different results, they need to change how they're doing things. And that typically will lead to the concept of a business transformation and how we're going to make those changes. But business transformation, that term is kind of getting thrown around a lot. It's very ubiquitous. So I wanted to, first of all, just spend a few minutes talking about, when we talk about business transformation, what do we really mean? And so what I did is I just pulled up some definitions, right? I went to some companies that tend to support a lot of business transformations. Many of you may have heard or even done work with these companies, Deloitte, McKinsey. I'm not going to read these to you, but I'll leave them up here for a minute, let you kind of talk through as we really start to understand what do we mean when we talk about a transformation or a business transformation. What does that actually look like? I also went on and looked at Harvard Business Review because I think that's an important one. And then in the world that we're in, I gave AI a shot at defining business transformation. And this is what AI came up with. So the bottom line that I want to take away from this, and that I want folks to understand, is business transformations have some essentially common basics, right? That span across all of these transformations. So they are, first of all, intentional and deliberate. So this is stuff that the organization isn't just necessarily reacting to, but it's an intentional and deliberate attempt to move an organization in a specific way, right? So with that, there is an expectation for change. So the idea being that any transformation means that the organization should look different, should act different, should be different than when it began the transformation. So there's that expectation that some kind of a change is going to happen. Typically, transformations are not incremental. So incremental stuff is like smaller projects, enhancements, smaller changes that get made. Transformation really speaks about something much bigger, much broader than some of those incremental changes. And we're going to talk about the catalyst and kind of some of the key things that will trigger a transformation and what those look like. I also put in here the focus is almost always economic. So it's either to drive revenue, to reduce costs, to expand the market. All of those are essentially economic in nature. That's why these transformations ultimately get their, kind of get their get. So and when I say economic, it's both cost and revenue. So it could be both sides of that from the standpoint of the economy. And then finally, I will tell you just from experience, these are almost always disruptive. So anytime that you're going to step in and do a transformative change within an organization, there's going to be disruption. And we're going to talk a little bit about, from a transformation leadership perspective, why you need to go in with that mindset, because you are going to disrupt status quo. And so you've got to be essentially ready, willing, and able to understand what that's going to look like. So when we think about transformation, when I look at especially the last kind of 10, 15 years of work that I've done around these transformations, and I've been through many, many transformations at different organizations. So as Beth indicated, I've got some prior military experience. I retired in 2010, but then I went on to work at organizations like Prudential, Medtronic, Target, Thomson Reuters, and others. And across the board, all of the big transformational activities tend to stem from one of these key drivers. So the first is a technical driver. So a great example of this is one of the ones that I'm working on right now at Thomson Reuters, which is essentially an SAP modernization. We're moving from an old ECC basis of SAP to the new SAP S/4HANA. But technological changes can include digital transformations. It can include things like tech stack changes, modernization, sunset, getting old stuff out of the environment, right? There's a lot of big banks right now that are going through transformations, just getting rid of old mainframes. And then the other one that we see a lot of from a transformation standpoint is migration. So a lot of organizations are now moving their technology stacks essentially from an on-prem to a cloud-based environment. The second one that you're going to hear a lot about is performance. So cost reductions. This happens a lot in operational areas, contact centers, back office operations, where essentially the effort is intended to specifically reduce expenses within an organization and reduce those things. There are organizations, some of which you just heard, like for example, McKinsey has a whole program around performance transformation called the WAVE program, and that is specifically intended to identify opportunities to reduce cost and reduce expense. Then you have structural changes. This is really merger and acquisition work. So a lot of organizations obviously engage in merger and or divestiture, and that could be not just parts of the business, but it also could be entire product lines that an organization might acquire or might divest. When that happens, it leads to a transformational change, right? So let me give you a real world example of this one. Thomson Reuters recently announced and is currently in the process of divesting its FindLaw product. The FindLaw product is really the last product at Thomson Reuters that has a business to consumer flair. After they get rid of FindLaw and divest it, essentially the entire organization will be focused on B2B structure, not B2C. And so again, that creates this structural change that has to be addressed from a transformation standpoint. How are you going to integrate new parts of the business that you've acquired? How do you get rid of and divest when you're selling parts off? The other one is innovation. So this is all about revenue increases, responses to market changes. This is really kind of the direct opposite of that performance transformation. Innovation transformation is really about driving revenue, increasing essentially market share and or the profitability of the organization. And then the last one that sometimes happens is often organizational. So this is where there are fundamental changes in the workforce and or cultural changes. So again, let me give you an example of an organization might decide to pursue offshoring from an operations standpoint and move operations or contact center, especially back office operations, to lower labor markets that can help to, again, save money. Has a component of performance cost reduction, but that's actually not the primary impetus. It really is around changing the workforce in the organization. Now, with this, right, if these are the drivers of transformations in organizations, and many of you have probably experienced working on initiatives like these, you know as well as I do that it's very rare for a transformation to only hit on any one of these aspects. Usually, you're hitting on multiple components of this simultaneously, and transformation leadership is really how you're balancing across all of these major components and major drivers, and what are some tools that will help us get there. So let's move on to kind of the process, right? So the road to a successful transformation begins kind of with this model. And this is an adapted version that I've taken from working with some different organizations, different consulting firms. So I've worked with McKinsey, I've worked with Deloitte in different organizations, worked with different consulting firms. And at the end of the day, you're going to hear a lot of stuff that relates to these kind of steps. My order might be slightly different, or how I describe it might be slightly different. But first and foremost is beginning with the strategy and the model. And we're going to hit on each one of these in a little bit of detail, but we're not going to go deep. We're then going to talk about how you drive to value. So in other words, once you understand what your strategy is, what does value look like? So oftentimes in the military, we talk about this concept of commander's intent. And I ask this a lot today of teams that I have the opportunity to be a lead of. Like, one of the questions that I will say is, look, if you get done with this SAP modernization, what does it look like when you're done? Define that end state that you're going to have when everything has been completed. And if everything went according to plan, what does that end state look like? That commander's intent, or that intent and definition, is so critically important, because that's where you're going to articulate the value that you're going to drive. And that value can be value to the customer, it can be value to shareholders, it can be internal value. But ultimately, if you don't know what you're driving to and you haven't indicated what that end state looks like, you're going to get lost along the way, and that's going to create problems. Lead with capabilities. If you have been involved in business architecture, you know this one well. We're going to talk about this a little bit. But capabilities are really, what now do we have to do as an organization to deliver that value and to execute on our strategy? Making it sustainable. This one is really important. So often organizations will enter into, and you're going to see this towards the end of the discussion, organizations will enter into transformations, but they don't know how to sustain it. They haven't created the structure to actually keep it alive. So they go through all of this effort to introduce this change, and then the change ultimately just withers and dies because we weren't thinking about the long-term sustainability and what are the things that we need to ensure are in place to effectively get change. Be agile and flexible. I always say And for those of you that have heard me talk before or been a part of my classes, you'll know that I probably say this a lot. Life doesn't follow a plan. It just doesn't. There is absolutely no project plan that I have ever created that went exactly according to how I planned it was going to go. So the agile and flexibility is a little bit more of a small a than the large A in terms of agile development. This is really about being flexible in your approach as you approach the transformation and being able to adjust for the things that are going to happen that are inevitably going to take focus off or try to derail you. And then finally, focusing on people. And I'm going to hit on this one last because we're going to talk a bit about a Harvard Business Review and really 6 key attributes that they found to really be key to a successful transformation. Here's a hint. They're all related to people. So we're going to come back to that one again. But let's talk about each of these just very briefly. And
Hey,
again,
Mandy,
yeah, go ahead.
quick question for you, and maybe you're going to come to this. The diagram with the circle and the arrow makes it look as if you do them in this like chronological order. Is
Yes.
that true?
It is. So, really now they are sequential for the most part in terms of steps, but these are really going to overlap. So you should be doing this stuff throughout the transformation and revisiting. So let me give you a really great example. If you're driving, let's say, to a particular modernization from a tech stack, let's say that that's one of the key drivers of a transformation, and you're making a move. A lot of organizations right now are moving from SAP ECC, which is the legacy version, to SAP S/4HANA, which is, for those that don't know, SAP is the back-end ERP platform. That's where all of the revenue and the financials and the billing and the invoicing and the manufacturing, all of that takes place within what's called the SAP platform or an ERP platform. You may start, right, that initiative with a certain frame of reference and a certain value that you're going to drive. And let me give you a very real world example of where at times you have to be able to shift your strategy by going back and making sure that, again, you're following the plan. So to your point, Beth, yes, this shows in a very sequential way, but I'm going to call out that agile and flexibility means that you should be prepared to go backwards and hit on these things. So let me give you a real world example. So at Thomson, we're in the process of moving from SAP ECC to SAP S/4. I will tell you, we've had to adjust from really what we've been calling an SAP kind of commercial systems transformation to now an SAP migration. So what do we mean? Why is that different? The transformation was really, we've got multiple business segments that all do things a little bit differently. Their commercial models are different. How they approach the customers are different. We wanted to get a single way of doing business, a single set of commercial models that we could then essentially build into the future state application and move everybody to it. That would be transformational. The reality is we're not going to get there. So within the last year, the organization has figured out we do not have enough time. So SAP has been clear that they will be shutting support for SAP ECC in the next probably 2 to 3 years. 2027, I think, is the turnoff date. They will provide extended support for 3 years beyond that. But for anybody who's been involved in an ERP transformation, that's not enough time. So the organization has shifted its strategy from essentially a fundamental transformation and aggregation to really a migration. Let's get off of the current ECC platform and move to a future state S/4, even if that's fragmented in the future state, just as it's fragmented in the current state today. So that's a great example of where, we started down this path to success path, but then we went backwards and we had to revisit based on changes in the environment and things that were happening. So again, it's really important to be flexible. So sequential, but not necessarily linear. It's always repeatable, and you're always going to be jumping back and forth to reassess as you go along.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through these at a really high level, folks. If you want to go deep on this stuff, definitely consider the business architecture program. We're actually in the process, I would even say, of evolving it a little bit more towards a transformation course. to bring in more than just the business architecture components. So I can't go deep today because we're already halfway through. So we're going to have to skim through these. So first and foremost, strategy definition. So what is a strategy? Well, the strategy is ultimately, as an organization, what do we want to be, right? What is that beacon that's laying out where we want to go from a strategy perspective? Where do we want to compete? What do our customers, what are they going to want from us? What's the value proposition that we're going to talk about in a minute? The strategy is critically important because, as you're going to find, a strategy in conjunction with an appropriate model, you might have identical models within organizations, but different strategies about how you pursue that. So the strategy and the business model are both extremely important at this stage. So 80% of companies fail to execute on strategy, and we're going to talk again a little bit about why that is. But overall, it's because of the inability of the organization to pivot and actually execute effectively on transformations in order to achieve that strategy. So that's the whole point of why we're here today, right? Is how do we get better success in that strategy execution and that transformation execution? Let's talk a little bit about the difference between a model and a strategy, because this is really important. And I'm going to use two examples. This is, again, from Harvard Business Review. I tend to pull a lot of content from there because there's some really great, smart folks there. But let's take essentially two companies, Kmart and Walmart. And for some of you, maybe Kmart doesn't even ring a bell, and you're like, I don't even know what that organization is. Well, mass retailer from many years ago. Kmart and Walmart, ironically, had identical business models. Both of these organizations ended up essentially applying supermarket logic to the traditional department store model. They both made that adaptation, but where they went different was in their strategy. So Kmart essentially executed this, tried to basically execute this strategy across everything. They tried to essentially be everything to everybody with no real distinction for how they were going to grow or what their appropriate customer segments were. Now, this example is getting a little bit dated, but I'm going to show you essentially how Walmart grew as rapidly as it did. So Walmart, and especially in its early days, Sam Walton basically had a very different approach. He was actually quoted as saying, we're going to put good-sized stores in these little one-horse towns, focusing on the rural customer that everybody else was starting to ignore. So what he understood is that the essentially the current markets were saturated, and that wasn't where they were going to start. And so Walmart began in these more rural areas where customers were being ignored, and essentially had explosive growth in doing that, which then allowed them to come in and more effectively compete in the saturated markets. So again, identical models, very different strategies, and I bet you would all agree, very different outcomes in terms of what happened for both of those organizations ultimately. All right, let's get on to driving to value. What do we mean by driving to value? So ultimately, I'm going to talk just very briefly about this concept of the value proposition and the value proposition canvas. So bottom line is, driving to value means, why would your customers give a hoot about what you're doing? Why do they care about your products? Why do they care about your company? Why do they choose to essentially go shop or do business with you for your products and services as opposed to any other competitor that's out there? A critical component of understanding the value that you're going to drive to in a transformation is, why, essentially, why would customers choose to do business with you? And how is the value that you provide as an organization different than your competitors? So key to any value proposition is that it's unique, right? It's something that you can leverage as essentially a competitive advantage. So typically, this is one of the things where I start to talk about, let's talk about an organization that we can all relate to, Apple. One of Apple's greatest value differentiators, right? They have many, but I'm going to talk about a few that they really stress because it helps to differentiate them from other companies. The first, anybody want to take a guess on what they think the first big differentiator of Apple is from a consumer perspective? If so, throw it in chat. Nobody's going to take a shot. All right. What if I said what happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone? Anybody ever see that ad campaign by Apple? So security was something that Apple identified and really tried to push. They basically are saying, look, we are not going to create backdoors for our devices. Everything that we do tends to be driven from a secure perspective. So for those that are familiar with the Apple ecosystem, HomeKit and all of the different home products that work within the Apple ecosystem have to actually have a unique security chip that prevents that home device from external hacking or helps to essentially protect it from a security perspective. So that's a big value driver from Apple perspective. Another big value driver, and this again is driven from the strategy. So Apple has determined here's the things we want to go after, here's the value we're going to drive, and here's how we're going to differentiate. We're going to try to differentiate ourselves from a security perspective, protecting people's data and information. And then the other one is design, right? So they led with the iPhone, they led with the iPad, and really led with some of these big design changes that fundamentally altered that competitive environment. What I really want to get to with regards to this drive to value is what are you, again, trying to accomplish? Think about, again, that commander's end state or that commander's intent that I talked about at the end of the transformation. What's your anchor? What are we trying to do? And again, I'll give you a very real world example. I tend to pull in a lot of examples from organizations that I'm currently working at. We were trying to solve a problem within my current organization, Thomson Reuters, about when a customer calls in with an issue and they bypass the contact center. So they go directly to their account rep and say, hey, you know what? I'm having this issue with my bill. We today don't have a mechanism for how our customer service executives can get that issue into the hands of our customer to cash, order to cash team to resolve that customer's issue. And so we started this whole initiative to basically put in place a mechanism so that we could pass these issues on to the people who could resolve the issues and track it and manage it and have visibility to it. So we constantly, through that process, had to keep coming back to what's the problem we're trying to solve? That's the value. And if you can't articulate that in a very easy way, and let me just say, the problem we're trying to solve is an issue gets into the hand of a customer service executive. They need to get it resolved. They need that issue to get into the hands of the person who's going to own the resolution. They need to be able to look at the status so that they can give an update to their customer and keep them informed as to what's going on. That's the anchor. And everybody on that project can articulate that. That's the value. That's what we're trying to drive. Again, so many organizations embark on a transformation and the value is well, we're going to save money. How? You got to get specific when it comes to value. What are we truly trying to drive here and be specific? All right, let's talk about capabilities. So this is essentially step number 3, where we're leading with capabilities. Once you understand the value that you're going to bring to customers and you've defined your strategy about which customers you want to go after and why those customers would differentiate to choose you, in other words, what's your value proposition, how do you now deliver on that? Capabilities are just that. They are what an organization has to do in order to deliver on the expectations of the customers and the clients and also shareholders. So these are often referred to as the building blocks of an organization. They don't typically change a lot. Now, in some cases, new capabilities get introduced. So we are going through a revolution of this across a whole number of industries right now, where AI is being introduced as a brand new capability. So let me give you an example. Thomson Reuters, again, I'm going to use my current organization because it's easy. Thomson Reuters basically has multiple customer segments. We sell essentially legal reference information to law firms, basically making it easy from all state and federal governments. They consolidate all of this information and they sell an easy way to basically research legal information for law firms and other legal organizations. One of the things that we have identified, that Thomson Reuters has identified, is that legal professional services industry is likely one of the most that is ripe for disruption from AI. So last year, the organization invested heavily in beginning to introduce brand new AI capabilities that we never had before. One of those is an AI capability called co-counsel, where essentially an attorney can log on to co-counsel and get essentially AI advice, for lack of a better term, based on all this massive legal learning model that's been compiled by the organization, and get real world advice that is based on legal fact and legal opinions. And so that co-counsel is a brand new AI capability that's only just recently been introduced in the organization. So capabilities can change. You can add new ones, you can take some away. But these are critically important to the organization. These are the building blocks from an organizational standpoint. The other thing to remember about capabilities is they're a foundational domain. So this is why we say start with capabilities. They're required to implement your strategy. You have to know what you have to do to implement. Your business partners are going to leverage your capabilities. So those that you're going to essentially partner with are going to leverage your capabilities, your value streams, and how you deliver value are going to execute on capabilities. And finally, capabilities, in order to function, need the right information. Last thing I'm going to talk about when it comes to capabilities is the concept of enablers. So capabilities are static, and we typically do not, for lack of a better term, think about capabilities changing significantly within an organization. But what does change are the enablers of a capability. So every capability within an organization. So let's take an example to make this real. Design at Apple. So design and product design at Apple is what I would call an advantage capability. Again, it's something that differentiates them. That capability is enabled by the people that they hire, the kinds of people that they hire, the kinds of resources they bring to bear, the incentive programs that they apply for these folks. That enables how well they do design. There's also process as an enabler to capabilities. So how they do design is going to have various processes and ways that they go about it, how they do their research, et cetera, et cetera. It's also going to be enabled by technology, right? So how does technology, how does the current technological environment enable them to do that effectively? You know, are they using the latest in terms of CAD software and CAD design and technology around batteries and everything else? And then finally, information. Information is also, it's one of the most overlooked, but I would argue almost one of the most important enablers to a capability. And in this case, one of the things is, what features do people want? Like before you go off and start designing a new capability, so let me take again that example of AI that I talked about recently. We went out and partnered in the development of that AI co-counsel. We partnered directly with attorneys and really had some very critical conversations to apply that information and that knowledge into the creation of the AI capability itself. So information is critically important. All right. Now we have to sustain the change. So you're starting to introduce these changes. You're starting to introduce capabilities that change. But again, a lot of organizations forget that they're not thinking about the long term. So they implement these changes and then they just move on and we don't actually get sustainable change. This is one of my favorite slides when it comes to change. And it basically talks about we need essentially these 5 components to get sustainable change. We need a vision, we need to have skills, and the people need to be able to do it. We need to have the right resources in place. We need to have a plan for how we're going to get there, and then incentives. If we are missing any one of these things, so let's say, for example, we don't have a vision, we haven't defined the strategy. We have skills and we got resources and we have a plan and we have incentives, but there's confusion because nobody really knows where we're going. If I told all of you to just go get in your cars today and drive for the next hour and we're going to meet up somewhere, we're all going to end up in probably 27 different places around the Twin Cities because there's no vision about where we're going. There's no end state. We're all going to be confused. If I take skills out of it, right? And now our people are going to feel, the people in the organization are going to feel anxiety. They're going to be asking themselves, like, can I be successful in this new environment? This is a big one within the AI transformation that's going on right now in a lot of industries. People are asking the question, do I have the skills to be successful in a new AI environment where AI could be taking my job or eliminating different roles? If we don't build those skill sets, people are going to be terrified. They're going to have all this anxiety about, yeah, but what does the future look like? And am I going to be successful? If we don't have the right resources, it's frustration. So if everything is tried to, is attempted to be done with half the amount of money that it should take or half the amount of resources, people get frustrated. And I know every single person on this call, I know everybody's been there, right? Where you're inadequately resourced and you get frustrated because you can't ultimately compete. And again, you're going to see this in that HBR review coming up. If we don't have a plan, we're going to have a bunch of false starts. So we have a vision, we know where we're going, but we're not sure how we're going to get there. We're going to end up with a bunch of false starts. And finally, if we don't have the right incentives, if we don't have the right motivation, you're going to end up with apathy. Nobody's going to want to actually ultimately commit to the change. And this one is really important because there's a fundamental aspect of change that really makes it sustainable long term. And that is human beings tend to not change until there is one key thing that exists, and that is dissatisfaction with the status quo. When you are unhappy with the way things are, you're going to be open to change. But if you're perfectly content and you've got everything you feel like you need, change isn't going to happen. And that's part of the incentives, both from a monetary and a compensatory standpoint, but also incentives for why is it important to embrace AI in the future, even though AI is going to fundamentally change the job landscape. It's important, right? So we've got to be able to offer people the incentives for you're going to be safe and you're going to be able to do that. All right. Let's go into the be agile and flexible. What do I mean by that? I just mean, again, life's not going to follow a plan. We can go through and you can create this transformation leadership structure, but I'm here to tell you, all 5 of these things are going to happen all the time, and it drives me nuts. And we're going to talk about each of these just briefly. Don't get hamstrung by indecision. If I had a nickel for every single organization that spent way too long getting to logical decisions, this to me is number one. It kills organizations. And a lot of times where this happens is you have executive leaders who are unwilling to give up the authority of making the decision, but who don't have time to become knowledgeable about the decision they're trying to make. So what happens is they get frozen. They either end up making bad decisions or they just wait to make a decision and we get frozen and hamstrung in indecision. Another big one that I see executive leaders do, and if there's any executive leaders on this call, please listen to these 2, rushing to results, right? Well, we're going to deliver it. We're going to set a date when at the very beginning of a transformation, we're going to set a date and say, this is the date we're going to shoot for. Guess what? How much information do you think we actually have at the very beginning of a transformation to informed in an informed way set that date? We try to rush to these results to stuff something in that then, I mean, how many people here, is anybody here stayed abreast of Sonos and the Sonos app redesign? Anybody heard about this? So the CEO of Sonos just ended up resigning. The chief technology officer, CIO for Sonos just got fired because they rushed out an app redesign of the Sonos app that completely messed up the environment. It absolutely pissed off customers. Estimates are that it has cost the organization somewhere in the neighborhood of over $500 million in value. And it's all because they were rushing to get those results out. All right, I'm just going to head on these quickly because I want to make sure that I give enough time for any questions at the end. Team resistance, folks are going to resist. And again, especially if you forget some of those things that are needed for change on the previous slide. You're going to get cultural blocks where the organization may not react well to some of the changes that are being responded to just based on the culture of the organization. And then lacking a strong backbone. This is another one. I often refer to this as intestinal fortitude. Are we going to stick with it when it gets tough? Because all transformations get tough. And when people start to complain about the change, or it starts to get more expensive than we thought, so often organizations pull back because they're afraid of what might continue to happen, and they're unwilling to make the risk. And that lack of a backbone, again, leads to just stalling. All right, so what are the tools? What are the things that you can use? We've talked about business architecture. So lots of organizations are great at business strategy and they're great at business execution. But there's this gap between things like mission and vision and priorities and customer requirements and the collaborative IT projects and the initiatives that you're doing. Those have to be informed by this business architecture layer, this organizational alignment, the goals and objectives, the capabilities, the information concepts, the value streams that help bridge between the strategy and the execution. Another one is the business model canvas. So this is a great way to either understand changes in your environment as an organization or to introduce entirely new models for how you want to do business. So for those that have not worked with the business model canvas, it is a absolutely wonderful, phenomenal tool. Another one is the value proposition canvas from the same organization that did the business model canvas. Both of these are from an organization called Strategizer with a Z. All of the content on the Strategizer website, or a lot of it, is free. Highly recommend that you go take a look. But this, again, really helps you understand what is it that our customers are trying to get done? What are those jobs that they're trying to achieve? What are the things that are preventing them from doing that? And what do they hope to get when that job is complete? That helps to inform how can you help them get those jobs done, or either A, eliminating the job altogether. Maybe you automate the job for the customer, or maybe you're alleviating pains. Maybe you're making it easier to get some information or to use a particular item. This really helps that drive to value component. And then the decision-making model. So again, I talk about this a lot. You heard me talk about indecision and how it's, in my opinion, it's one of the most important factors when it comes to transformation is that we get caught up in this analysis paralysis. First of all, decision-making is a deliberate process. It's not just an event that happens. It's got to follow a certain process. And we may not always be aware that we're working through this process, but every single one of us uses this process every day. So we analyze the situation where we're having to make a decision. Why am I making this decision? What do I know about it? Maybe I want to buy a car. What kind of car do I need? What are the things that I'm going to be trying to do with that car? Then I define my objectives. Well, you know what? I decided based on my situation, I really want an SUV. I want to be able to bring a kayak with me somewhere or something. I develop my alternatives. I go out and I take a look at all of the different cars that are available, and I start to look at what meets my requirements. And then I make the decision, right? Oh, but I missed a step. Here's the one that most of us don't even realize we're missing. What are the trade-offs and consequences of that decision? So maybe I had to give up some features for a particular vehicle that I was thinking about buying because it doesn't have them, but it's got most of the things that I really wanted. Also, by buying a new car, maybe suddenly the consequences is I've got a loan payment now that I've got to make every single month. Bottom line, decision making is hard. And this is one of the areas where I'm going to talk a little bit about the military decision-making process. This is probably one of the pieces that has been most relevant that I've brought from my military experience into my corporate experience. Executives struggle to make fast, sound, well-informed decisions. They just do. The military, I would argue, does this really well. There's this whole process called the military decision-making process where they receive the mission. There's a staff that does a mission analysis. That includes things like identifying the facts and assumptions, what we know to be true and what we think we know. People are assigned to essentially turn assumptions into facts. You develop your alternatives, course of action development. You analyze those and war game them. There's this concept in MDMP called the FAST test. Is an idea feasible, acceptable, suitable? That's a screening criteria. So if an idea that I have to solve a problem does not pass the FAST test, stop talking about it. So, and what does that mean? FAS, feasible, acceptable, suitable. I can do it. I have the resources and the technological wherewithal to be able to actually achieve it. If I do this thing, it's going to deliver the results that I expect, and it's going to help me achieve the outcomes I want to achieve. And 3, it's suitable, meaning that it's actually going to solve what it is for the customer. So the suitable is really the customer's benefit. The acceptable is the organization's benefit. So often we talk about these new product ideas or these decisions we talk about essentially options that really aren't options. They never were because they failed the FAST test, but we spend all this time churning because we didn't put essentially an alternative to bed as early as we could have or should have. Then when you have essentially the alternatives that are left after they make it through the FAST test, then you compare those against each other in the evaluation criteria in a very non-biased way. And again, I could do a whole probably 4-week course. In fact, there is a 4-week course on the military decision-making process, MDMP. It's called Command General Staff College. So we're not going to get into that here. All right, finally, the Scaled Agile framework. Whether you choose to take a look at SAFE or some other framework, the bottom line is this just helps to break down the concepts of what you're trying to deliver simultaneously. So as we talked about, transformations tend to be really big. So there's likely going to be components that are technical. There's components that are likely going to be process oriented. There's components that will likely lead to structural changes or organizational changes or training or skill set. By understanding each of those and essentially aligning them within this scaled agile framework, that's where you're going to be able to keep tabs on where the dependencies are and where the interactions are. All right, I'm going to go into my last section here. I'm going to talk about this HBR study. So this was an article that was written about, I guess, three and a half years ago now in 2021. And basically, so the title of the article is called The Secret Behind Successful Corporate Transformations. And what they did is they identified 128 organizations that went through essentially a transformation and really looked to see which ones actually achieved the outcomes that they intended to achieve, both reputationally with their customers, but also economically in terms of the savings or the revenue increases. And out of the 128, only 28 said, we actually achieved everything we set out to do. 104 maybe got some financial standpoint, but suffered in other ways. And then the remaining just essentially missed the boat on all. But basically what this should tell you is transformations are hard. So these things are not easy to get through for all of the reasons that you've seen just prior to this. But there were 6 components that I thought were super interesting that were identified that were consistent with the 28 companies. And basically, again, I'm not going to read through these. I'll let you take a look. But they're all people-centric. So essentially, the organizations who invested in their people as part of the transformation, both from a compensation, a diversity perspective, there's some interesting things about women in here that I thought was kind of fascinating. But ultimately, what this basically says, the findings are clear. You have a better chance at success if you include a focus on people during the transformation. Ultimately, here's the deal, folks. And this is my humble opinion. So for those of you that know me, you know I'm pretty opinionated and outspoken about stuff. Too often we forget about organizations are these organic structures that are full of human beings. We tend to look at organizations from this really static, generic standpoint, not thinking about all of the stuff that happens when you introduce human beings into the dynamic. So if you don't pay attention to the people, if you don't bring them along, if you aren't thinking about them as a leader, I would challenge you to go back and just understand the implications of that. One of my favorite quotes, and this is actually on my LinkedIn banners, from Simon Sinek, and it says, "Leadership is about taking care of those in your charge, not being in charge." And so just think about, from a people perspective, how important this is. And again, I've got the link to that article right here if you want to take a look at it. But let me pause there. I know we've only got like 3 minutes left. The last thing I'm just going to say right here, parting thought: fear stifles our thinking and actions. It creates indecisiveness that results in stagnation. I've known talented people who procrastinated indefinitely rather than risk failure. Lost opportunities cause erosion in confidence, and the downward spiral begins. So don't be afraid. As a transformational leader, go after it. Trust me, good stuff will happen. All right, Beth,
Yeah.
I
So,
ate up all the
Mandy,
time.
probably unbeknownst to you, I told everybody you were going to stay late to answer all their questions. So,
I can do
so
that.
even though we're kind of rushing, I put in the chat an aha moment. So, feel free to, I guess, unmute and ask a question. Did you say that was okay, Mandy? I
Absolutely.
pay
Yeah.
attention. Okay. Or put a question into the chat if you like. And if you just want to share your aha moment, I'm going to share my screen while we wait for questions to come in. Um, all right. So I had promised, and I can't, sorry, I gotta see here, a code. So there's the code if you're interested in taking the business architecture course. I will also say a couple of things. I dropped in the chat the link to this course to learn more about it. I also dropped a link into a free webinar that we did almost a year ago, I think, on the elements of change chart that Mandy talked about. So if you wanted to learn more about that, you could. And then also that when Mandy said we're looking to do more transformation leadership, we've just created a new course, Leading Teams Through Change, that will probably be a part of that. Mandy and I are going to start working on that together this spring. But the course exists. So if you're interested in your organization, taking a course that's not just about compliance, but about bringing people along, that course would be a good one for your organization. Someone asked if we make the slide decks available, and we do not for free webinars, but in about a month, we will post this link, an edited version of today's webinar on our website, and you can go access it there and then take another look at the slides in, I guess, slow motion. I'm not seeing anyone unmute, and I'm not seeing any questions in the chat.
Nobody's got questions? Come on.
I
Julia, you
know.
must have a question. How are things going there at Medtronic?
You are being recorded. uh, and lastly, I will preview next month. We have Eric from our IPD staff talking about navigating polarizing conversations in the workplace. So that's probably
That'd be a
a
good
hot
one.
topic. And March topic to be decided. We know it'll be Eric, that we haven't gotten any further than that. So that's what's coming up. And again, we'll pause. I know, Mandy, apparently you were just so thorough.
I find that hard to believe, but I am adding that particular seminar because I think that'll be a fun one. So I'm going to add that to my calendar right now.
So, all right. Maybe people are just so scheduled that as soon as 1 o'clock rolls around, they got to roll on to their next meeting.
That could be.
All right. Well, thank you, Mandy,
Sure.
so much. I
Yeah.
took away a lot of stuff, and I've had an email started to people in my organization that I was adding to while you were talking. But again, um, give us 2 to 3 to 4 weeks to get the edited version of Mandy's presentation up on the IPD website, and then you can share that link with your leaders in your organization or whoever else you want to have hear this. And with that, we'll sign off and hope that you join us next month. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Yeah. Thank you.